Daniel Crawford's weathered hands froze on the rusted trap's jaws, his morning coffee forgotten on the pine stump behind him. The wolf pup wasn't just alive. She was staring directly into his soul with piercing blue eyes that seemed to recognize him from somewhere impossible. This wasn't any ordinary wolf. This was Angel. Sarah Mitchell's veterinary bag crashed to the forest floor, medical supplies scattering across the moss as she stumbled backward, her face draining of color. The coffee mug shattered against a boulder, the sound echoing through the Colorado wilderness like a gunshot. Daniel's mind reeled as memories flooded back. Michael's secret journal, the name Angel written in his son's careful handwriting, the wolf pup his boy had loved and lost 4 years ago. The same pup that had vanished the night Michael died searching for her in that terrible storm. "Get the tranquilizer," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling with 4 years of buried grief. "And call the sheriff." How was she still alive? And what did her return mean for the town that had already buried too many secrets? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 4 years ago, Daniel Crawford had been Pine Ridge's most respected forest ranger, a man who could track a deer through 3 counties and knew every hiking trail by heart. His cabin on Whispering Creek had been filled with laughter then. His son Michael's weekend visits, Sarah's professional consultations that always turned into dinner invitations, and the easy rhythm of a life well lived at 64. The walls had displayed 3 generations of Crawford family photos, Cherokee arrowheads passed down from his grandmother, and Michael's forestry degree hanging proudly beside Daniel's own retirement plaque. Then came that October storm, the kind that turns Colorado mountains into death traps. Michael had called him, voice tight with worry about some project he'd been working on, something about a lost animal he'd been caring for. Daniel had told him to wait until morning, that no animal was worth risking his life in that weather. Those were the last words he'd spoken to his son. And they found Michael's body 3 days later at the bottom of Copper Canyon, apparently searching for something in the darkness. His truck had skidded off the rain-slicked mountain road. No animal was ever found. Daniel had retreated to his cabin like a wounded bear, letting his hair grow wild and his beard turn silver white. He'd sold his house in town, kept only the bare necessities, and spoke to no one except the grocery clerk when supplies ran low. Sarah Mitchell had tried to reach him countless times that first year. She'd been the town's wildlife veterinarian for 15 years, a woman whose Lakota grandmother had taught her that animals were sacred messengers. At 45, she'd dedicated her life to healing creatures that couldn't speak for themselves, finding purpose in her work after losing her fiancé in Iraq. Her small clinic on Main Street had become a sanctuary for injured wildlife, and she'd often consulted with Daniel on difficult cases. But after Michael's death, Daniel had stopped answering her calls. Pine Ridge itself had changed too. Once a thriving logging community, the town now struggled with an economy built on tourist hunting expeditions and seasonal cabin rentals. The main street showed gaps like missing teeth, closed shops, faded for rent signs, and the kind of quiet desperation that settles over places where young people leave and don't come back. Only about 800 souls remained, mostly older folks who remembered when the sawmill employed half the county. Mrs. Eleanor Henderson, 78 and sharp as her late husband's hunting knife, had been watching Daniel's decline from her kitchen window that overlooked the creek road. She'd known the Crawford family since Daniel was in diapers, had baked cookies for Michael's school fundraisers, and understood the particular kind of grief that comes from outliving the next generation. Her own Harold had been gone 3 years now, leaving her with too much time to notice things others missed, like the expensive trucks that sometimes visited Marcus Blackwood's property on the far side of town, or how certain families suddenly seemed to have money during the town's leanest years. This was the world Angel had stumbled back into, bloody and broken, carrying secrets that would unravel everything. The first night was touch and go. Daniel had carried Angel, he couldn't bring himself to call her Luna yet, into his cabin wrapped in his old flannel jacket, her breathing shallow and irregular. Sarah arrived within the hour, her emergency kit bouncing in the passenger seat of her mud-splattered pickup truck. She took one look at the wolf pup and immediately set up a makeshift operating table on Daniel's kitchen counter. "Daniel, this animal has been severely traumatized," Sarah said, her hands working with practiced efficiency as she cleaned the wounds around Angel's neck and legs. "These aren't trap injuries. Someone did this deliberately." Her voice carried the controlled anger of someone who'd seen too much cruelty in her profession. "The rope burns suggest she was restrained for an extended period. And look at this." She parted the fur on Angel's left shoulder, revealing a small, healed scar. "That's from a microchip insertion." Daniel felt his chest tighten. Wild wolves didn't have microchips. "You saying someone owned her?" "More than that. Someone trained her." Sarah's scanner beeped, displaying a registration number on its small screen. "This chip is registered to Pine Ridge Wildlife Research Foundation. I've never heard of them, have you?" Daniel shook his head, but something nagged at him. A half-remembered conversation with Michael about wildlife preservation projects. "Can you trace it?" "I'll try. But right now, our priority is keeping her alive." Sarah prepared a sedative injection. "She's dehydrated, malnourished, and showing signs of psychological trauma. See how she flinches when I reach for the medical instruments? That's learned behavior." As Sarah worked, Daniel found himself studying Angel's face. The blue eyes were unmistakable. He'd seen them in Michael's sketches scattered throughout his son's old room, but it seemed impossible. Michael had told him about rescuing an injured wolf pup during his college internship, had shown him drawings and talked about her intelligence, but that was over 2 years ago and Michael had said she'd disappeared. Could a wolf-dog hybrid survive on its own for years? Daniel asked quietly. Sarah paused in her examination. "Not easily. They're too domesticated for true wilderness survival, but too wild for most human environments." "Why do you ask?" Before Daniel could answer, Angel's eyes fluttered open. She looked directly at him and made a sound, not quite a whimper, more like recognition. Then she did something that made both humans freeze. She lifted her front paw and placed it gently on Daniel's hand, just like a dog would. "Jesus," Sarah whispered. "I've never seen wild wolf behavior like that." Daniel's throat felt thick. Michael used to say that when you save something, it remembers you forever. He stroked Angel's head carefully. "What if she's been trying to find her way back this whole time?" Over the next 3 days, Angel's recovery was nothing short of remarkable, not just physically, though Sarah's treatment had worked wonders, but in the way she seemed to understand human emotion and intention. When Daniel sat by the fire reading Michael's old forestry journals, Angel would curl up beside his chair, occasionally placing her head on his knee when grief threatened to overwhelm him. She learned the cabin's routine instantly, waiting by the door when Daniel prepared for his morning walk, positioning herself between him and any unexpected sounds from the forest. But it was the small things that truly amazed them. Angel knew to wait for permission before entering rooms. She responded to basic commands like stay and come without any apparent training from Daniel. Most remarkably, she seemed to recognize specific objects that had belonged to Michael, his old flannel shirt, his leather journal, even his coffee mug. When Daniel accidentally knocked over Michael's mug on the 3rd evening, Angel immediately went to it, gently picked it up in her mouth, and brought it back to him. "This isn't normal," Sarah said, watching Angel's behavior from the kitchen doorway. "She's not just intelligent, she's emotionally bonded to this place, to these things. Daniel, I think you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Michael was hiding something significant from you." That night, while Sarah slept on the couch and Angel dozed by the fireplace, Daniel finally opened Michael's personal journal, the one he'd been too heartbroken to read after the funeral. The first entry that mentioned Angel was dated 3 months before Michael's death. Angel is getting stronger every day. Dad would love her, but I can't tell him yet. Not until I figure out what to do about the people who had her before. They're not going to let this go, and if they find out where she is, they'll come for her. I've seen what they do to the animals they can't control. I won't let that happen to her. She trusts me now, trusts humans again after what they did to her. I have to protect that trust. Daniel's hands trembled as he read on, realizing that his son's death might not have been the accident everyone believed. The sound of approaching vehicles shattered the morning quiet on Daniel's 5th day with Angel. 3 black SUVs wound up the narrow dirt road toward his cabin, their engines growling like mechanical predators through the pine forest. Angel's ears pricked forward, and she positioned herself between Daniel and the approaching threat, a low rumble building in her chest. "Easy, girl," Daniel murmured, but his own hand instinctively moved toward the hunting rifle mounted above his fireplace. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, her face pale as she recognized the lead vehicle. "That's Marcus Blackwood's Escalade," she said quietly. "What would he want with you?" Daniel had known Marcus peripherally for years. A successful businessman who'd moved to Pine Ridge about a decade ago, bought up several struggling properties, and somehow always seemed to have money when others were scraping by. He ran what he called an outdoor recreation consulting business, though Daniel had never been entirely clear on what that meant. The vehicles stopped in a semicircle around Daniel's cabin, their occupants remaining inside with engines running. Marcus stepped out of the lead SUV alone, a tall, well-dressed man in his early 40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of controlled movement that suggested military training. He wore an expensive hiking jacket and boots that had never seen a real trail. "Daniel Crawford," Marcus called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We need to talk about the animal you're harboring." "She's not being harbored," Daniel replied, stepping onto his porch with Angel beside him. "She's recovering from injuries. Dr. Mitchell here can verify her medical condition." Marcus's eyes fixed on Angel, and something cold passed across his features. "That animal is dangerous, Crawford." "More dangerous than you realize. 3 years ago, a wolf matching that exact description killed my 6-year-old son, Tommy." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Sarah gasped, taking an involuntary step backward. Angel, sensing the tension, moved closer to Daniel's leg. "I'm sorry for your loss," Daniel said carefully, "but this wolf was found injured in an illegal trap. She's shown no aggressive behavior whatsoever." "Wolves are cunning," Marcus replied, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "They know how to appear docile when they're planning their next attack. I've spent 3 years tracking this particular animal, Crawford. 3 years of sleepless nights knowing she was still out there, still a threat to other families." Sarah found her voice. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm a licensed veterinarian, and I can assure you that this animal shows no signs of aggressive—" "Dr. Mitchell," Marcus interrupted, "with all due respect, you're not qualified to assess the danger this animal presents. I've contracted with Colorado Wildlife Services to have her removed and properly handled. They'll be here within the hour." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "You can't just take her without proper documentation. She's under veterinary care, and there's no proof of your allegations." Marcus reached into his jacket and produced a manila folder. "Actually, I can. This is a court order authorizing the capture and examination of any wolf or wolf hybrid matching the description of the animal that killed my son. It was signed by Judge Harrison yesterday afternoon." As Marcus spoke, Daniel noticed movement in the other vehicles. At least 6 men, all wearing tactical gear and carrying what appeared to be tranquilizer equipment. This wasn't a simple wildlife removal. This was a military-style operation. "You seem awfully prepared for finding one injured wolf," Sarah observed, her scientific mind working despite her fear. "I've been preparing for 3 years," Marcus replied, "ever since I found my boy's body and the tracks leading away from our property, ever since the sheriff's department told me there was nothing they could do about a wild animal acting on instinct." Angel whined softly, and Daniel realized she was trembling, not from fear but from what seemed like recognition. She was staring at Marcus with an intensity that made Daniel's skin crawl. "Wait," Daniel said slowly. "If this happened 3 years ago and you've been tracking her, how do you explain the fact that she's been missing for months? Where has she been?" Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Wolves have large territories. She could have been anywhere within a 50-mile radius. But Daniel's years as a forest ranger had taught him to read body language as well as animal tracks. Marcus was lying, or at least not telling the whole truth, and the way Angel was reacting suggested she knew this man, but not as a victim's father seeking justice. "Mr. Blackwood," Sarah said suddenly, "would you mind if I examined your documentation more closely? As the treating veterinarian, I have a professional obligation to ensure this animal's welfare." "The paperwork is in order," Marcus replied curtly. "But if you insist." He handed her the folder, but his eyes never left Angel. Sarah opened the folder and began reading, her expression growing increasingly confused. "This court order is based on an incident report from October 15th, 3 years ago. But Mr. Blackwood, that's the same night Michael Crawford died in the car accident on Copper Canyon Road." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel felt the world tilt around him as the implications sank in. Michael had died on the same night Marcus claimed his son was killed by a wolf. Both incidents involving the same animal, on the same night, in the same general area. "What aren't you telling us, Marcus?" Daniel demanded, his voice raw with sudden understanding. "What really happened that night?" Marcus's composure finally cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. "Your son was harboring a dangerous animal, Crawford. He was protecting a killer, and it got him killed too. Now, I'm going to finish what should have been done 3 years ago." Angel moved then, positioning herself protectively in front of Daniel, her body language shifting from fearful to determined. For the first time since he'd found her, Daniel saw the wolf beneath the trained facade, not aggressive, but absolutely prepared to fight for her family. "Stand down," Marcus called to his men, raising his hand. "But keep your weapons ready. This animal has already killed twice." The standoff stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Daniel's mind raced as he tried to process Marcus's revelation. If Michael had been protecting Angel, and both Michael and Marcus's son had died on the same night, then everything he thought he knew about his son's death was wrong. "I want to see the incident report," Daniel said finally, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "If you're going to accuse my son of harboring a killer, I want to see the evidence." Marcus hesitated, then nodded to one of his men, who approached with a tablet. "The official report is here, but Crawford, you need to understand that your son was in over his head. He thought he could rehabilitate a dangerous animal, and it cost both our boys their lives." Daniel read quickly, his forest ranger training helping him parse the technical language. According to the report, Marcus had found his 6-year-old son Tommy in their backyard on the night of October 15th, apparently attacked by a large canid. Tracks led from the scene toward the national forest. The coroner's report indicated severe trauma consistent with a large predator attack. But something bothered Daniel about the details. "Marcus, this says Tommy was found at 11:47 p.m. Michael's accident was called in at 11:52 p.m., 5 minutes later and 12 miles away. How could the same animal have been in both places?" "Wolves can cover a lot of ground quickly," Marcus replied, but his certainty seemed forced. Sarah, who had been studying the veterinary portion of the report, looked up with a frown. "This doesn't make sense. The bite patterns described here aren't consistent with wolf behavior. Wolves kill by grabbing the throat or nose and suffocating their prey. This describes multiple wounds across the torso and limbs. That's more consistent with... She paused, realizing what she was about to say. Consistent with what? Daniel demanded. With defensive wounds, like the animal was protecting itself or someone else. The implications hung in the air like smoke. Angel whined softly and moved closer to Daniel, her blue eyes fixed on Marcus with what could only be described as accusation. Marcus's face had gone pale. You don't understand what you're dealing with. This animal is part of something bigger, something that's been festering in this community for years. Your son discovered it, and it got him killed. What are you talking about? Sarah asked. Before Marcus could answer, the sound of another vehicle approaching made everyone turn. Mrs. Eleanor Henderson's ancient Ford pickup came grinding up the hill, the elderly woman driving with determination that defied her 78 years. She parked between the SUVs and Daniel's cabin, effectively blocking any quick escape. "Eleanor," Daniel called out, "you should get out of here. This could be dangerous." "Dangerous my foot," the old woman replied, climbing out of her truck with surprising agility. "What's dangerous is letting lies go unchallenged for 3 years." She fixed Marcus with a stare that could have melted steel. "Marcus Blackwood, it's time you told the truth about what really happened to those boys." Marcus's composure finally shattered completely. "Eleanor, you don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Eleanor's voice carried the authority of someone who'd been the town's unofficial keeper of secrets for decades. "I know about your little hunting operation on the back 40. I know about the rich clients who pay premium prices to hunt animals that can't really run away, and I know that Tommy didn't die from any wolf attack." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Angel seemed to sense the significance of Eleanor's words, her ears pricked forward with intense attention. "You're confused, old woman," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Because I was awake that night, Marcus. I was sitting by Harold's bedside in the hospital. He was dying, remember? And I got a call from Jenny Lakefield at the diner. She'd seen your trucks heading toward the old Morrison place at 10:30 that night, the Morrison place that just happens to border your property." Daniel felt pieces of a terrible puzzle beginning to fall into place. "What's at the Morrison place?" Eleanor looked at him with something approaching pity. "It's where Marcus runs his canned hunting operation. Rich folks from back east pay big money to shoot wolves and bears in controlled environments, animals that have been raised in captivity, animals that don't know to run from humans." Sarah gasped. "You mean like Angel? Like a wolf-dog hybrid that had been socialized with people?" "Exactly like that," Eleanor confirmed. "And 3 years ago, your Michael found out about it. He'd been tracking radio-collared animals for his internship project and discovered that some of them were disappearing into what should have been protected territory." Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have no proof of any of this." "Don't I? Because I also know that Michael called you that night, Marcus. He called you and told you he was coming to get his wolf back. The wolf he'd rescued from your operation months earlier and thought he'd successfully hidden." Daniel's legs nearly gave out. "Angel was... she was one of your hunting animals? Michael found her in one of the holding pens," Eleanor continued relentlessly. "She was just a pup then, maybe 4 months old. He couldn't stand the thought of her being used as target practice for some rich coward, so he took her. Spent months rehabilitating her, teaching her to trust humans again." Angel moved then, walking directly to Eleanor and sitting at her feet, a gesture of recognition and trust that confirmed everything the old woman was saying. "But that night," Eleanor went on, "something went wrong at your facility, didn't it, Marcus? Your own son wandered onto the property. Maybe he heard the animals. Maybe he was looking for his daddy. And one of your hunting clients, probably drunk and trigger-happy, shot before identifying his target. Marcus made a sound like a wounded animal. It wasn't. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. So you covered it up, Daniel said, understanding flooding through him like ice water. You made it look like a wolf attack to hide the fact that your son was killed by one of your clients. And when Michael showed up to rescue Angel, Sarah added, you couldn't let him expose the truth, so you chased him. In that storm, on those mountain roads, you chased him until he went over the edge, Marcus finished, his voice broken. I never meant for it to happen. I just wanted to scare him, make him understand that he couldn't expose the operation. Too many people depended on the money it brought in. Daniel felt a rage building inside him unlike anything he'd ever experienced. You killed my son to protect your business? The whole town benefits from the operation, Marcus shouted desperately. Do you think Pine Ridge could survive without that money? The clients spend thousands every weekend, hotels, restaurants, guides, equipment. Half the town works for me in some capacity. So that's why no one ever talked, Eleanor said sadly. They all knew, didn't they? About the hunting operation, about what really happened that night. They kept quiet because they needed the money. The enormity of the betrayal was staggering. Daniel looked around at Marcus's men, realizing that some of them were local faces, men he'd known for years, men who'd attended Michael's funeral and offered their condolences. Angel suddenly stood and walked to the edge of the porch, her nose testing the air. A moment later, they all heard what she had detected first, the sound of multiple vehicles approaching from town. A lot of vehicles. Looks like word's gotten out, Eleanor observed with grim satisfaction. I may be old, but I still know how to work a cell phone. I called everyone in town before I drove up here. As the first pickup trucks came into view, Daniel could see familiar faces. Jenny Lakefield from the diner, Tom Morrison, whose property bordered Marcus's, Dr. Patterson from the medical clinic, and at least a dozen others. They parked in a ragged line along the road and began walking toward the cabin, their expressions ranging from guilt to determination. "What's this about, Marcus?" Jenny called out as she approached. "Eleanor says you've been lying about Tommy's death for 3 years. Marcus looked around at the gathering crowd, then at his own men, several of whom were now lowering their weapons. The truth was finally coming out, and there was no way to stop it. "The question now," Eleanor said quietly to Daniel, "is what you're going to do about it. Because that girl there," she nodded toward Angel, "she's the only witness to what really happened that night. And she's been carrying that secret for 3 years, just like the rest of us." Daniel looked down at Angel, understanding finally why she'd seemed so traumatized, why she'd been so desperate to find her way back. She wasn't just a rescued animal. She was a survivor, carrying the memory of 2 deaths and the knowledge that the man responsible had never been held accountable. "What happens now?" Sarah asked softly. Daniel straightened his shoulders, feeling something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Purpose. Now we get justice for our boys. All of them. The confrontation that followed was unlike anything Pine Ridge had ever witnessed. What started as a quiet revelation at Daniel's cabin had exploded into a community-wide reckoning, with nearly half the town gathered on the narrow mountain road. The truth about Marcus's hunting operation and the cover-up surrounding both boys' deaths spread through the crowd like wildfire, igniting years of suppressed guilt and complicity. "You all knew," Daniel said, his voice carrying across the assembled faces. "Every one of you knew what Marcus was doing, and you stayed silent because it put money in your pockets." Jenny Lakefield stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Daniel, we didn't know about the boys. We knew about the hunting, yes, but Marcus said it was all legal, all licensed. We needed the income. The diner was about to close, same as half the businesses in town." "Legal hunting doesn't require secrecy," Sarah interjected. "Legal hunting doesn't involve penned animals or drunk clients shooting in the dark." Tom Morrison, whose property had been used for the operation, removed his hat and clutched it to his chest. I leased my back 40 to Marcus for wildlife management. I never asked too many questions because the money kept my farm afloat. But I swear to God, Daniel, I never knew about Tommy or Michael. Marcus stood in the center of it all, his expensive facade crumbling as the weight of 3 years of lies came crashing down. His men had gradually backed away, some removing their tactical gear entirely. Even they seemed stunned by the scope of the deception. "It started small," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "Just guided hunts for wealthy clients who wanted a guaranteed trophy. We used animals from game farms. Everything was supposed to be contained and controlled. But the money was so good and the town was dying." "So you expanded?" Eleanor said with disgust. "Brought in more animals, bigger operations, riskier situations. The clients wanted authenticity. They wanted to hunt wild animals, not farm-raised ones. So we started acquiring animals from other sources. Wolves from illegal breeders, bears from circuses that were shutting down, animals that were semi-domesticated but could pass for wild." Angel moved restlessly beside Daniel, and he realized she was remembering. Her behavior made terrible sense now, the way she'd initially flinched from certain sounds and movements, the intelligence that came from human contact, the trust that had been broken and slowly rebuilt. "Angel was one of those animals," Daniel said. "It wasn't a question." Marcus nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "She came from a breeder in Montana who was going out of business. She was young, maybe 3 months old, already partially socialized. We were going to use her as breeding stock first, then eventually feed her to your clients," Sarah finished with disgust. "But Michael found her first," Eleanor added. "He was doing his wildlife research project, tracking radio-collared animals, and he discovered the operation." Marcus's composure finally broke completely. "He showed up at the facility one night in June 3 years ago, demanded to know what we were doing with the animals. I tried to explain that it was business, that the town needed the income, but he wouldn't listen. He took the wolf pup and said he was going to report us." The crowd had gone silent, hanging on every word. Daniel felt his hands shaking as the full scope of his son's courage and compassion became clear. "Michael threatened to expose everything," Marcus continued, "so I convinced him to wait, told him I'd shut down the operation gradually, find legitimate homes for the animals. I bought myself time, but I was really planning to relocate somewhere else." "But you didn't shut down," Jenny said. "The hunting continued. The clients had already paid deposits for fall hunts. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, money that half this town depended on for survival. I thought I could manage both, keep Michael quiet, and fulfill the contracts." Daniel stepped forward, Angel moving protectively beside him. "What happened the night they died?" Marcus looked up at the darkening sky, as if seeking divine intervention. "Everything went wrong at once. We had a group of clients in from Dallas, wealthy oil executives who'd been drinking all day. They were hunting in the back section, where we kept the more aggressive animals, bears mostly, and an older male wolf that had never fully adapted to captivity." He paused, his voice breaking. "Tommy must have heard the gunshots. He was supposed to be asleep in the house, but he was always sneaking out to see the animals. He'd gotten attached to some of them, especially the younger ones." Sarah made a sound of understanding. "He went to check on them. He made it to the holding area just as one of the clients fired at the male wolf. But he missed, and the wolf broke free from the enclosure. In the dark, with all the chaos and noise, the client panicked. He saw movement and fired again." The silence stretched until Eleanor finally spoke. "He shot the child." Marcus nodded, tears finally coming. "It was an accident, but it was my fault. My operation, my negligence, my greed. The client wanted to call it in, accept responsibility, but I panicked. I knew it would destroy everything. The business, the town's economy, my family's reputation. So you staged a wolf attack, Daniel said, his voice hollow. We had to do something with the male wolf anyway. He was too aggressive, too dangerous after the escape. So we made it look like he'd attacked Tommy. The client left immediately, flew back to Texas that same night. Angel whined softly, and Daniel realized she had witnessed it all. A young wolf-dog hybrid, already traumatized by captivity, forced to watch as humans she'd learned to trust, committed an act of ultimate betrayal. But Michael found out, Eleanor said. He came that night to get Angel back. He'd realized something was wrong when he heard about Tommy's death, put together the timing. He confronted me at the facility, saw what we'd done. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. He said he was going to the police, that he couldn't let me get away with murdering a child and covering it up. The crowd stirred angrily, but Daniel held up his hand for silence. He needed to hear the rest. I followed him when he left, tried to reason with him. The storm was getting worse, and I thought if I could just make him understand what exposure would mean for the town. But he wouldn't stop, wouldn't listen. He had Angel in his truck, and he was driving toward town to find Sheriff Peterson. Daniel closed his eyes, seeing it all with terrible clarity. His son, driven by righteousness and love for an innocent animal, racing through a storm to expose a conspiracy that had already claimed one child's life. I caught up with him on Copper Canyon Road. I wasn't trying to hurt him, just force him to stop so we could talk. But when I pulled alongside his truck, Marcus's voice failed entirely. You caused the accident, Sarah said quietly. The road was slick. Visibility was terrible. When he swerved to avoid my vehicle, he lost control. I watched his truck go over the guardrail and I drove away. Left him there to die. The crowd erupted in angry shouts, several people moving toward Marcus before his remaining men stepped between them, but Daniel remained still, processing the magnitude of his son's final moments. Michael had died trying to save Angel and expose the truth about Tommy's death. He'd died being the man Daniel had raised him to be. What happened to Angel? Daniel asked. She was thrown from the truck during the crash, probably unconscious. We searched for her for weeks but never found her. I assumed she'd died in the wilderness. But she survived, Eleanor said. Somehow, that little one survived 3 years on her own, and now she's come back to tell the truth. Angel moved then, walking deliberately to the center of the gathered crowd. She sat down facing Marcus, her blue eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made everyone present understand they were witnessing something profound. This was not just an animal. This was a witness, a survivor, a living testament to the corruption that had poisoned their community. She remembers, Sarah whispered. She remembers everything. Marcus looked at Angel and seemed to crumble from within. I'm sorry, he said, his voice broken. I'm so sorry for what I did to you, to both boys, to this whole town. I thought I was protecting everyone, but I was only protecting myself. Daniel stood looking at the man who had killed his son, feeling a rage so pure it threatened to consume him. But beside him, Angel remained calm, patient, as if she understood that justice would come in its own time. Sheriff Peterson is on his way, Eleanor announced, holding up her cell phone, along with state wildlife officers and federal agents. Seems there are laws about interstate trafficking of endangered species that carry serious prison time. As if summoned by her words, the sound of sirens began echoing through the mountain valley, growing closer with each passing moment. The arrests began at dawn. Daniel had spent the sleepless night watching from his porch as federal agents, state wildlife officers, and county sheriff's deputies descended on Pine Ridge like an occupying army. The scope of Marcus's operation, revealed through witness statements and a hastily obtained search warrant, was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Sheriff Peterson, a weathered man in his 60s who'd known Daniel since they were boys, arrived at the cabin just as the first light filtered through the pine trees. His face carried the weight of someone who'd just learned that his entire understanding of his community had been built on lies. "Daniel," Peterson said, removing his hat as he approached the porch where Daniel sat with Angel at his feet. "I need to tell you something that's going to be hard to hear." "Harder than learning my son was murdered?" Daniel replied, his voice hollow from exhaustion and grief. Peterson winced. "The federal boys found evidence at Marcus's facility, records, photographs, financial transactions going back 7 years. This operation was bigger than we thought, and it has connections that reach all the way to Washington, D.C. Sarah, who had also stayed the night, emerged from the cabin carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Daniel and settled beside him on the wooden steps. Angel immediately moved to position herself between Sarah and the sheriff, her protective instincts still sharp despite the night's revelations. "What kind of connections?" Sarah asked. "The kind that involves senators and congressmen paying premium prices to hunt endangered species in controlled environments," Peterson replied grimly. "The kind that involve federal wildlife permits being falsified and protection programs being manipulated. Marcus wasn't just running a local poaching operation. He was part of a national network." Daniel felt his stomach turn. How many people knew? Too many. "We've got a list of participants that reads like a who's who of American politics and business. Some of the richest, most powerful people in the country have been coming to Pine Ridge to hunt wolves, bears, and big cats that were supposed to be under federal protection." Angel whined softly, and Daniel realized she was responding to the tension in his voice. He placed a gentle hand on her head, marveling at how this one animal had survived everything that had been done to her and somehow found the strength to expose the truth. "There's more," Peterson continued. "The federal agents want to interview you about Michael's research. Apparently your son had been documenting the illegal activities for months before his death. His research notes and photographs are some of the strongest evidence they have." Sarah leaned forward. "Michael was building a case against them. More than that, he was working with an undercover federal wildlife agent who'd been investigating the network for 2 years. Michael's death wasn't just a cover-up of Tommy's accident, it was the elimination of a federal witness." The words hit Daniel like physical blows. His son hadn't just been a good-hearted young man trying to save an animal. He'd been working with law enforcement to expose a criminal conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking. "Why did I spend 3 years thinking my son died in a meaningless accident?" "Because the federal investigation had to continue," Peterson explained. "If Marcus or his associates had known that Michael was working with federal agents, they would have destroyed evidence and fled. The agent Michael was working with had to maintain his cover." As if summoned by the conversation, a black sedan pulled up the dirt road. 2 men in dark suits emerged, their bearing unmistakably federal. The older of the 2, a man with silver hair and kind eyes, approached the porch with the careful respect of someone delivering long-overdue news to a grieving parent. "Mr. Crawford, I'm Special Agent David Reyes, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I was your son's contact in our investigation." Daniel stood slowly, Angel rising beside him. "You knew my boy." "I did. And I want you to know that Michael Crawford was one of the bravest young men I've ever had the privilege to work with. His research and documentation have allowed us to dismantle a criminal network that's been operating for over a decade." Agent Reyes opened a briefcase and removed a thick folder. "Michael's investigation identified the members of what we're calling the Apex Network, wealthy individuals who pay enormous sums to hunt endangered and protected species in controlled environments. The network operated facilities in 7 states, with Pine Ridge being one of the largest." Sarah examined the documents, her face growing pale as she read. "Some of these clients paid over $100,000 for a single hunt." for the privilege of killing animals that couldn't truly escape, Agent Reyes confirmed. Wolves raised in captivity, bears with radio collars, big cats that had been declawed or drugged. It was slaughter masquerading as sport. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. And my son died trying to stop it. Your son died because he refused to be bought off or intimidated. Marcus offered him money, threatened him, even tried to convince him that exposing the operation would destroy the town's economy. Michael's response was to work harder to document every aspect of the criminal activity. Angel suddenly stood and walked to Agent Reyes, sniffing his outstretched hand before sitting calmly beside him. The agent smiled sadly. She remembers me. I was there the night Michael rescued her from the facility. She was just a pup then, terrified and traumatized from months of captivity. You were there? Daniel asked. I was working undercover as a hunting guide. Michael had contacted us after discovering radio-collared animals were disappearing into what should have been protected territory. We arranged for him to document the facility while I maintained my cover inside the operation. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, but each revelation brought fresh pain. Daniel realized that Michael had been living a double life in his final months, carrying the weight of terrible knowledge while maintaining the facade of a normal college student. The night he died, Agent Reyes continued, Michael called me in a panic. He'd discovered that Tommy Blackwood's death wasn't a wolf attack. He'd witnessed Marcus and his associates staging the scene. He knew that an innocent child had been murdered and the truth was being covered up. So he went to get Angel, Sarah said, against my explicit instructions. I told him to wait for backup, but Michael couldn't stand the thought of Angel remaining in that facility, knowing what Marcus was capable of. He said she was the only living witness to Tommy's real death, and that she deserved better than to die in a fake hunt for some rich sociopath's entertainment. Daniel felt tears burning his eyes. Even facing a criminal conspiracy and mortal danger, his son's compassion had driven him to risk everything for an innocent animal. We lost radio contact with Michael around 11 that night, Agent Reyes continued. By the time we realized something had gone wrong and mobilized a response team, it was too late. Marcus had already staged the accident and disposed of any evidence that might have linked the crash to the hunting operation. But Angel survived, Eleanor Henderson said, approaching from where she'd been standing near the road. Somehow, that little girl survived and made her way back to tell the truth. Agent Reyes nodded. For 3 years, she's been living wild in the national forest, probably sustaining herself on small game and scraps from campsites. The fact that she survived at all is remarkable. Wolf-dog hybrids rarely adapt well to wilderness conditions. She was looking for Michael, Daniel realized. All this time, she was trying to find her way back to him. Animals form powerful bonds with their rescuers, Sarah confirmed. She probably spent years searching for Michael, and when she couldn't find him, she came to the next best thing, you. Angel looked up at Daniel with those piercing blue eyes, and he finally understood the full weight of what she represented. She wasn't just a rescued animal or a piece of evidence. She was his son's final gift to him, the living embodiment of Michael's courage and compassion. What happens now? Daniel asked. Agent Reyes closed his briefcase. Now, Marcus Blackwood and 17 other members of the Apex Network face federal charges for conspiracy, racketeering, murder, and violations of the Endangered Species Act. The evidence Michael gathered, combined with Angel's survival and return, has given us everything we need for convictions. And Angel? Angel is officially a protected federal witness. She'll remain in your custody as long as she's safe and well cared for. Frankly, Mr. Crawford, I can't think of anyone better qualified to give her the life your son would have wanted her to have. As the federal agents prepared to leave, Daniel stood on his porch looking out over the mountain valley that had been his home for 68 years. Pine Ridge would never be the same after today. The truth about the Apex network would destroy some families and devastate the local economy, but it would also finally bring justice for two innocent boys and the animal who had somehow survived to tell their story. Angel pressed against his leg, and Daniel realized that for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't alone with his grief. He had a purpose again, a reason to face each new day. His son's courage lived on in the wolf-dog hybrid who had endured everything and still chose to trust in human goodness. "Come on, girl," Daniel said softly. "Let's go see what kind of life we can build together." 3 weeks after the arrests, Daniel Crawford discovered something that would change everything he thought he knew about his final days with his son. He was cleaning out Michael's old room, a task he'd avoided for 3 years, when he found a loose floorboard beneath the window. Hidden underneath was a waterproof container holding Michael's personal journal, a collection of photographs, and a letter addressed simply to Dad. Daniel's hands trembled as he opened the letter, dated just 2 days before Michael's death. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me, and Agent Reyes has given you this box as we planned. I hope you can forgive me for keeping secrets, but I couldn't involve you in what I was doing. The people we're investigating are dangerous, and I couldn't risk them targeting you, too. I need you to know that Angel, the wolf I've been hiding, is more than just an animal I rescued. She's proof of something terrible that's been happening in our community. She was born at Marcus's facility, raised to be killed for sport by people who think money gives them the right to destroy innocent lives. When I found her, she was scheduled to be the entertainment for a congressman's birthday party. But Dad, there's something else you need to know. Angel is pregnant. The father is a pure gray wolf from the facility, one of the last descendants of the original Rocky Mountain wolf population. Her pups will be genetically invaluable to conservation efforts, but only if they're born free and safe. I've been working with Dr. Mitchell to prepare for the birth. She doesn't know about the federal investigation, but she's agreed to help with the delivery when the time comes. If something happens to me, please find a way to contact her. Angel trusts her, and the pups will need professional care. I love you, Dad. I know you think I'm reckless, but everything I'm doing is because of what you taught me, that we have a responsibility to protect those who can't protect themselves. Angel and her pups represent hope for an entire species. Please don't let my death be for nothing. Take care of them. Take care of yourself. And remember that every time you look at Angel, you're seeing the future Michael Crawford helped to save." Daniel read the letter 3 times before the words truly sank in. Angel had been pregnant when Michael died. She'd survived 3 years in the wilderness while carrying and raising her pups alone. The implications were staggering. He called Sarah immediately, his voice urgent as he explained the discovery. She arrived within an hour, bringing her veterinary equipment and a stunned expression. "Daniel, if what Michael wrote is true, those pups would be incredibly important," Sarah said as she examined Angel with new understanding. "Pure Rocky Mountain wolf genetics have been diluted by decades of human interference. Angel's offspring could be the key to genuine wolf restoration in Colorado." But as Sarah conducted her examination, her expression grew troubled. "Daniel, I'm not seeing any evidence of recent pregnancy. If Angel gave birth in the wild 3 years ago..." She paused, unable to finish the sentence. "You think the pups didn't survive," Daniel said quietly. "Wolf-dog hybrids have a low survival rate in the wild, even under ideal conditions. Without a pack, without proper denning sites, without..." Sarah's voice trailed off as Angel suddenly perked up, her ears focused on something they couldn't hear. The sound that reached them moments later was faint but unmistakable, a wolf's howl echoing across the mountain valley. But this wasn't the howl of a wild wolf. It was higher, more complex, with an almost musical quality that spoke of intelligence and intention. Angel responded immediately, moving to the cabin door and whining with an urgency Daniel had never seen before. When he opened the door, she bolted into the forest with a speed that surprised them both. "We have to follow her," Sarah said, grabbing her veterinary bag. "If there's even a chance." They tracked Angel through the dense forest for nearly an hour, following her path by sound more than sight. The wolf-dog hybrid was moving with purpose, leading them deeper into the wilderness than Daniel had ventured in years. Finally they heard voices ahead, human voices mixed with the sounds of distressed animals. They emerged into a clearing to find Angel standing protectively over 3 young wolves, her body language radiating both joy and fierce maternal protection. But these weren't wild wolves, and they weren't alone. Marcus Blackwood's son Tommy, very much alive, sat beside them, his small hands gently stroking one of the animals. Daniel felt the world tilt around him as Tommy looked up with his father's eyes, but his mother's gentle smile. "Hi, mister," the 6-year-old said cheerfully. "Are you Angel's new dad? She's been looking for you for a really long time." Sarah made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Tommy? But you're supposed to be—" "Dead?" The voice came from behind them as Eleanor Henderson emerged from the forest, carrying camping supplies and wearing a look of profound relief. That was the story Marcus needed everyone to believe, but some secrets are too important to stay buried forever. The truth, when Eleanor finally told it, was both more complex and more heartbreaking than Daniel could have imagined. Tommy Blackwood hadn't died that night 3 years ago. He'd been badly injured by a panicked client's gunshot, but he'd survived. Marcus, faced with his son's critical condition and the exposure of his illegal operation, had made a desperate choice. "He faked Tommy's death," Eleanor explained as they sat around a small campfire Tommy had built with practiced skill, "paid off the coroner, created a fake body using remains from one of the hunting operation's animal casualties, and told everyone his son had been killed by a wolf attack." "But why?" Daniel asked, watching in amazement as Angel's 3 offspring, now nearly full-grown wolves, played around Tommy with the familiarity of littermates. "Because Tommy had seen too much," Eleanor said sadly. "That night, he'd witnessed his father's clients killing protected animals for sport. He'd seen them shoot an endangered black bear that was too old and sick to run, and he'd made it clear that he was going to tell someone what he'd seen." Tommy looked up from where he was scratching behind the ears of the largest wolf, a magnificent male with Angel's piercing blue eyes. "Daddy said I had to be dead so the bad men wouldn't hurt me or the wolves anymore. But I couldn't really be dead because then who would take care of Angel's babies?" The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Marcus hadn't just been covering up an accidental shooting, he'd been protecting his son from the very criminals he'd been working with. When Tommy had threatened to expose the operation, Marcus had realized that his associates would eliminate the child rather than risk exposure. "So Marcus sent him here," Sarah said, understanding dawning in her voice, "to live in the wilderness with Angel and her pups." Eleanor nodded. "I've been helping, bringing supplies and medical care when needed. Tommy's been living as Angel's pack member for 3 years, helping to raise the wolves and learning to survive in the forest. It was the only way to keep him safe until the federal investigation could shut down the network." Daniel looked at his son's journal, then at Angel, then at the impossible family unit that had somehow survived in the wilderness. "Michael knew, didn't he? He knew Tommy was alive." "Michael figured it out the night he died," Eleanor confirmed. "He saw Tommy at the facility when he came to rescue Angel. That's why he was so desperate to expose the truth. He realized that a child was being forced to live in exile because his father had gotten involved with dangerous criminals." Tommy stood up and walked over to Daniel, his young face serious despite his incredible circumstances. "Your son was nice to me. He promised he was going to fix everything so I could go home to my mommy." But then the bad storm came and he couldn't keep his promise. Daniel felt tears streaming down his face as the full scope of his son's courage became clear. Michael hadn't just died trying to save Angel. He died trying to reunite a family and restore a child to his mother. Marcus's wife, Daniel said suddenly. She thinks her son is dead. She's been living in hell for 3 years, Eleanor said quietly. But Marcus couldn't tell her the truth without risking Tommy's safety. The federal investigation had to be completed before Tommy could safely return to society. Angel moved then, positioning herself between Tommy and the adults, as if protecting him from the weight of their conversation. The 3 young wolves, Tommy's pack siblings, flanked her protectively, their loyalty to both Angel and the human child evident in every movement. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. Eleanor smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. Now that Marcus and his associates are in federal custody, Tommy can finally go home. The network has been dismantled, the corrupt officials are facing charges, and there's no longer any threat to a 6-year-old witness. But Tommy shook his head firmly. "I can't leave Angel and her babies. They're my family too. And the forest needs us to protect it." Daniel looked at this remarkable child who had survived 3 years in the wilderness, helped raise a pack of wolves, and somehow maintained the innocent faith that everything would work out for the best. He thought about his son's letter, about the responsibility to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, and about the family that had been broken by lies and could now be healed by truth. "What if there was a way for everyone to be together?" Daniel asked slowly. "What if Tommy could have both families?" Angel's tail wagged once, as if she understood exactly what Daniel was proposing. And for the first time in 3 years, Daniel Crawford began to believe that healing was possible, not just for himself, but for an entire community that had been torn apart by greed and fear. The wolves howled then, their voices carrying across the mountain valley like a song of redemption, calling everyone home. 6 months later, the Pine Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary and Education Center held its grand opening on a crisp October morning that painted the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and amber. The facility, built on the site of Marcus Blackwood's former hunting operation, had been transformed from a place of death into a beacon of hope for wildlife conservation and community healing. Daniel Crawford stood on the wooden platform that served as the sanctuary's main observation deck, watching as families from across the state gathered to witness something unprecedented in American wildlife conservation. Below them, in a carefully designed habitat that mimicked natural wolf territory, Angel and her 3 offspring demonstrated pack behavior for a group of fascinated school children. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah Mitchell announced through the microphone, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, "what you're seeing today represents more than just successful wildlife rehabilitation. This is a family that survived against impossible odds, and their story has helped expose and dismantle one of the largest illegal wildlife trafficking networks in American history." Tommy Blackwood, now 9 years old and serving as the sanctuary's youngest volunteer educator, stepped forward to address the crowd with the confidence of someone who had lived among wolves and learned their language. His mother, Rebecca, stood nearby with tears of joy streaming down her face, still marveling at the miracle of having her son return to her alive and whole. "Angel taught me that families aren't just about being the same species," Tommy said, his clear voice reaching every corner of the gathered crowd. "She showed me that love means protecting each other even when it's hard or scary. And she proved that sometimes the most broken things can become the most beautiful if you give them enough time and care." The largest of Angel's offspring, a magnificent male they'd named Michael in honor of Daniel's son, approached the fence where the crowd had gathered. His piercing blue eyes surveyed the humans with calm intelligence before he performed a behavior that never failed to amaze visitors. He sat quietly and allowed Tommy to demonstrate the communication signals that wolves use to maintain pack harmony. The remarkable thing about this pack, Dr. Sarah Mitchell continued, is that they represent a successful bridge between wild and domestic animal behavior. Angel's offspring carry genetics from the last pure Rocky Mountain wolf populations, but they also possess the social intelligence that allows them to interact safely with humans. They're living proof that conservation and education can coexist. Eleanor Henderson, now 81 and serving as the sanctuary's official historian, approached the microphone with the assistance of her walking cane. The crowd fell silent out of respect for the woman whose courage in speaking truth had made this day possible. 3 years ago, this community was built on a lie, Eleanor said, her voice still strong despite her age. We allowed greed to blind us to the suffering happening in our own backyard. We stayed silent when silence made us complicit in cruelty. But sometimes, the truth has a way of finding its voice through the most unexpected messengers. She gestured toward Angel, who had positioned herself protectively near the fence where Daniel stood. This remarkable animal survived trauma, loss, and 3 years of wilderness hardship to bring justice to 2 murdered boys and expose a criminal network that reached the highest levels of government. She didn't do it for revenge or recognition. She did it because love demands justice, and justice demands truth. The crowd erupted in applause, but Daniel found himself focused on something else entirely. Agent David Reyes had just arrived, and his expression suggested he carried news that would add another chapter to Angel's remarkable story. During the break between presentations, Agent Reyes approached Daniel with a folder of documents and photographs. "Mr. Crawford, I wanted to share some developments in the federal prosecution that I think you'll find meaningful." Daniel opened the folder to find detailed reports about the dismantling of the Apex network. 17 members of the criminal organization had been convicted on federal charges, with sentences ranging from 15 years to life in prison. But more importantly, the investigation had led to the rescue of over 300 animals from illegal facilities across 7 states. "Your son's documentation was instrumental in every single conviction," Agent Reyes explained. "His research methods were so thorough that we were able to trace financial transactions, identify corrupt officials, and locate animals that had been trafficked across international borders. Michael Crawford literally wrote the handbook for wildlife crime investigation." But the most significant news was yet to come. The federal government had established the Michael Crawford Wildlife Protection Grant, a program that would fund similar conservation efforts across the nation. Pine Ridge had been selected as the pilot site, with Daniel and Sarah designated as the program's first directors. "There's one more thing," Agent Reyes said, producing a final photograph from the folder. "We found this among the evidence seized from Marcus Blackwood's personal effects." The photograph showed Michael with Angel as a young pup, both of them sitting beside a pristine mountain stream. Michael's smile radiated the pure joy of someone who had found his life's purpose, while Angel gazed up at him with absolute trust and devotion. On the back, in Michael's careful handwriting, were the words, "Angel and me at the place where everything began. She understands that love is the only force strong enough to heal what hatred has broken." Daniel felt his vision blur as he studied his son's face. Even in his final weeks, facing danger and uncertainty, Michael had possessed a clarity of purpose that Daniel was only now beginning to understand. His son hadn't died trying to save an animal. He'd died trying to save the idea that humans could be worthy of an animal's trust. As the afternoon progressed, the sanctuary welcomed its first group of rescued animals from other facilities. A family of black bears, 3 golden eagles with wing injuries, and 2 elderly mountain lions who had been used in illegal breeding operations found new homes in carefully designed habitats that prioritized their physical and psychological well-being. Tommy worked alongside the professional staff, his unique experience as a human pack member proving invaluable in helping traumatized animals learn to trust again. His mother watched with a mixture of pride and amazement as her son demonstrated a gift for animal communication that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. He spent 3 years learning their language, Rebecca explained to a reporter from National Geographic who was documenting the sanctuary's opening. He knows things about wolf behavior that most researchers spend decades trying to understand. What looked like tragedy turned out to be the most extraordinary education any child has ever received. As the sun began to set over the Colorado mountains, casting long shadows across the sanctuary grounds, Daniel found himself alone with Angel at the memorial they'd erected for Michael. The bronze plaque read simply, "Michael Crawford." He believed that every life has value and every creature deserves protection. His courage lives on in every animal saved and every truth revealed. Angel sat beside him in comfortable silence, her presence a constant reminder that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds. Her offspring played nearby, their joyful energy representing the future that Michael had died trying to protect. "You know, girl," Daniel said softly, "I spent 3 years thinking I'd lost everything that mattered, but I was wrong. Michael didn't leave me with nothing. He left me with you, and through you, he left me with purpose." Sarah approached from the main building carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had found her life's calling. Over the past months, she and Daniel had developed a partnership that extended beyond their shared commitment to the sanctuary. They'd found in each other the possibility of love after loss, hope after despair. "The final count is in," Sarah announced. "We had over 2,000 visitors today, raised enough money to fund operations for the next 2 years, and received applications from 12 other communities that want to establish similar facilities." Angel's tail thumped once against the ground, and Daniel could swear he saw approval in her piercing blue eyes. This place, built on the ashes of Marcus Blackwood's criminal enterprise, had become exactly what Michael had envisioned, a sanctuary where broken trust could be rebuilt, where damaged creatures could heal, and where the bonds between humans and animals could be celebrated rather than exploited. As the first stars appeared over Pine Ridge, Daniel realized that he was no longer the bitter, isolated man who had discovered a dying wolf in a trap 6 months ago. He was a grandfather to a pack of wolves, a partner to a woman who shared his values, and a guardian of his son's legacy. Most importantly, he was proof that redemption was possible for anyone willing to choose love over hatred, truth over convenient lies, and healing over the comfortable numbness of despair. Angel pressed against his leg, and Daniel knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new animals to save, and new opportunities to honor his son's memory. But tonight, surrounded by family, both human and wolf, he was simply grateful to be alive and purposeful in a world that still contained miracles. Sometimes life's greatest gifts come wrapped in our deepest sorrows. Daniel Crawford thought he'd lost everything when his son Michael died. His purpose, his faith, his reason to keep going. At 68, he'd become a bitter hermit, convinced that his best years were behind him. But Angel, a traumatized wolf-dog hybrid, taught him that it's never too late for a second chance at family, love, and meaning. Through caring for this broken creature, Daniel discovered that his capacity for nurturing hadn't died with his son. It had just been waiting for the right moment to bloom again. The Pine Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary became more than a place of healing for animals. It became Daniel's proof that we can find new purpose in our golden years. his partnership with Dr. Sarah Mitchell showed that love can surprise us at any age, while his role as grandfather to Angel's pack proved that family comes in many forms. Michael's legacy lived on, not in grief, but in the joy of protecting innocent lives and building something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. Even at 68, Daniel learned that every sunset can lead to a new dawn filled with unexpected blessings. What unexpected blessing has changed your perspective in your later years? Have you ever found that caring for something vulnerable, a pet, grandchild, or community project, gave your life renewed purpose? Share your story below, and let's celebrate the beautiful second chapters that life can offer us.